Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of interviews with spiritually awakening people. I've done a little over 410 of them now, and if you like this one and you haven't heard other ones and would like to, there's a past interviews menu on batgap.com where you can see all the previous ones organized in various ways. This whole program is made possible by the support of appreciative listeners and viewers. My wife and I spend most of our time throughout the week working on it in one way or another. So if you would like to support it, if you appreciate it, there's a donate button on every page of the site. My guest today is Hans Laurentius. Hans is in the Netherlands. And first of all, welcome, Hans. Good to have you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi.
I'll read little bits of your bio, and then I'll kind of ask you questions as I'm reading the bio, because I have questions on some of these things. So you were trained in the 90s as a teacher in spiritual therapy. What is spiritual therapy, and who trained you?
Okay. Well, I was trained by, among others, Stammerding, and spiritual therapy has to do with chakras and energies and that kind of stuff.
I see. So you would work with people and then help them to clear their chakras or whatever?
Well, that was the intention. So
yeah.
For a very brief moment, I thought I would be a spiritual therapist, and then something happened. So it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, that's okay. Things never do.
Yeah.
And then the search stopped, you say, among other things, maybe mainly through the confrontation with Nisargadatta's I Am That and Ramana Maharshi's Glare.
Yeah.
Is that the something that happened?
Well, we always like to have a cause and effect thing.
Yeah.
So if we believe in that story, they had to do with it.
Okay. So you just basically focused on I Am That and maybe some Ramana Maharshi books and stuff, and
well, mainly
what?
The picture of Ramana.
Just staring, looking at the picture.
Yeah, I was opening the book one day. I was reading Nisargadatta, and I was opening the book I had on the shelf for a few years, but never read it. And well, something happened, a sort of push.
That's interesting.
And then I could, and then looking at the picture, and well.
Yeah, I've interviewed quite a few people who've had strange experiences with Ramana Maharshi, and in some cases, before they ever even heard of him or saw a picture of him, they would see him, some vision would come or something, and then later on they would see a book on a shelf in a bookstore, and well, that was the guy I saw, you know. So he's up to some tricks. Okay, so then you mentioned the spontaneous recognition of awareness, consciousness as reality. So that, again, you know, with apologies for the cause and effect thing, but that there was some such recognition as a result of this focus, possibly.
Yeah, maybe, but also in the trainings for the spiritual therapy, I had a lot of energetic experiences. So, and one of them was something of a turnaround, that I wasn't in the world, but the world was in me. So the experience was something like I'm walking inside of myself. I am this body, mind, but also everything else. And it just happened.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for it or anything, but these things occurred.
Did that kind of stuff happen to you even when you were young, like in childhood, or mainly later as you started this?
No.
No? That's another common
The first time, sorry.
Go ahead, no, you go ahead.
Well, the first I remember was when I was in a fight, and some kids were trying to kick the shit out of me, and then all of a sudden I had the experience, well, you can kick all you want, you cannot touch me.
Interesting.
You can only kick the body, not me.
Huh.
That was a weird thing. And another thing was I was running across the street. I think I was 14 or 16, I don't know exactly. But I fell in front of a car and I thought, well, that's it. And I only found it interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Or there was no fear or anything, just interesting looking at the grill moving towards me. And then afterwards, of course, the ego jumped up again and I was scared and shaky and all. But I didn't have anything to do with those experiences until in my 20s. Then I recognized, oh, something happened there.
Yeah. The reason I ask that, and the reason I find that interesting, is that that does come up quite a bit with people who have had some sort of spiritual awakening later on. Is they often have had stuff when they were a kid, and then later on it resurfaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Especially if it's somebody who has a spiritual awakening without having done a lot of practice or anything. It seems to be more common that they have a proclivity for such things, you know?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I often talk when I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You often talk?
Wanted to say that I often talk about this stuff in terms of a virus. Some people have the virus and others don't, and you cannot meditate yourself into a virus. You know, it will seek you out or not.
Mm. Yeah. We'll probably talk more about this. I think that, well, to take the virus metaphor, I think that for some people, a fair amount of meditation can make you susceptible to the virus and more likely to catch it, maybe. But, you know, I get your point. In Zen sayings, there's a saying that, you know, enlightenment may be an accident, but spiritual practice makes you accident prone.
Yeah. Well, there are two sides on that coin, because what I observe is that a lot of people who are in the form of practice, the practice becomes a shield more than a catalyst.
Yeah, I think that can be. I think it's hard to make universal rules about anything. There's always exceptions through every generality, but I've seen that too. You know, it becomes very habitual and rigid almost.
Yes, and thereby strengthening the ego, who always believes he can move from A to B, while in my opinion there's only A, and we should investigate A and not try to move to a better future or a better me or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of the spiritual practice is based on the assumption I am here and I got to be there, but there is no there.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox. We might as well get into this right now, and obviously feel free to disagree with anything I say.
Yeah, sure. You too.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox because, sure, it's here, and many people say that when enlightenment dawns, they realize this has always been this way. This has always been the case. You know, somehow it just wasn't recognized before. On the other hand, you can't say to a room full of people, you know, it's just this is the way it is, and expect 100% of them to wake up. There's going to be some kind of yeah. So for those people, in a sense, even though it's right here, it is kind of in the future, because maybe they will wake up eventually when there's enough clarity or something.
Yeah, or they have a car accident or whatever.
Yeah,
you never know.
Somebody tries to beat them up.
Yeah. You never know.
True. Yeah. Okay. So we'll get back into that more, I'm sure. So after that awakening, the I am consciousness was recognized to be the first identification. Is it possible to explain what that was like and how your life was lived after that? As opposed to how it had been before?
Yeah, well, the assumption here is that something changed on the body-mind level or in my life, but I don't think so much changed, or I don't even think that is relevant. So, in the course of time, if we accept time, things change, but it might also be that I'm 52 now and not 25, and there's a different phase or life energy or whatever. So it's very hard for me to say this is because of that and that is because of this. So I don't really know.
Yeah, that's a fair enough answer. And and I like that about you, actually, that you'll write an article. Let's say I've read all the articles, all the English written articles on your website, and you know, you'll state an opinion about something, and then you'll say, "But I don't know. You know, I might be wrong."
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
It's a healthy attitude. Yeah, well, that's an interesting question in and of itself. In fact, there was one of the articles on your website that was about morality, and that's one of the ones in which you particularly emphasize that you may not know. And there's a whole discussion about, you know, whether awakening changes behavior, and you know, whether one can be an enlightened scoundrel, so to speak, or whether, you know, one is going to become more compassionate or saintly or something like that as a result of the impact of realization. Do you have any opinions about that?
I think anything goes in this universe. So some people may soften up or be more pleasant. Other ones may not. I don't think, and no, let's put it differently. The thing I liked about working with energy as well as working with Advaita is that there is no basic rule of behavior. You know, it's not a code like most religions or philosophies. You should act like this or that.
Right.
Which is very strange. Freedom and rules of conduct, I think that is quite insane.
Yeah.
Well, what I do notice is people will be real, not necessarily pleasant. You know, and of course you use that word compassion. For me, compassion is a very strange word, because compassion is only possible when there are two. But the experience is there is no two. So I always say to people, the ocean doesn't have compassion with its waves. It is the waves. So compassion is a very strange concept to me.
Yeah, it would be strange to say the ocean has compassion. Like it would be strange to say you have compassion for your finger. You know, I mean, you wouldn't be inclined.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be inclined to cut your finger intentionally.
Right.
But
right.
You wouldn't say you're compassionate toward it.
Right, exactly. So a lot of these terms like having faith or surrender or compassion or acceptance are terms important for somebody who believes he's a separate entity.
Yeah, in one of your articles, you speak to something which I would call spontaneous right action. You say, to me, the right action results from the total energetical constellation of the moment. Yeah.
Yes.
Which.
And it presents itself. It's not a choice or something.
Yeah, and it's not something you could totally figure out. I mean, intellectually, you can't.
No.
You can't fathom
No
all the ramifications of every little thing you say or do.
Yes, exactly. And you cannot look into the future. So sometimes people say, because I'm teaching or writing stuff, oh, that's very good. But I say, I don't know. Because I cannot oversee all the implications, all the variables of what will happen when I say something to somebody. So there's no way to know. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Other people, especially when you believe you're a separate entity, you want to know what is the effect of your actions, and you're responsible and everything. And then you will cramp up.
Yeah, there's
Because
actually
it's terrifying. I might do it wrong.
Yeah, and
But yeah, right and wrong, it doesn't mean anything to me.
There's actually a verse in the Bhagavad Gita which says that action is karma or action is unfathomable by human intellect, and the only way you can be assured of doing the right thing is to be established in, you know, what you would call here awareness or consciousness and the self, and then perform action, and from then the sort of the intelligence of nature will work it out for you.
Yeah, and basically it is life happening, not Hans or Rick doing anything, although we might like to claim it, but that's just basically silly.
Yeah.
I am happening, you are happening, we're not somebody going somewhere or doing something.
Yeah. And so the whole thing about, you know, maybe behavior and gnarliness and stuff like that, I mean, you were inspired by Nisargadatta, and he was a good example. I mean, he was sort of a, kind of a rough character in a certain way, although very sweet and compassionate. He also smoked cigarettes, which I believe you still do.
Yeah, because of him, of course. No.
He eventually stopped.
Yeah, well, we all will.
Yeah, it's one way or the other. Okay. So, look, coming back to your bio here. Since 1998, you have led hundreds of satsangs, retreats, and private sessions. You've published 8 books and a booklet, many articles and columns, YouTube satsang videos, one is in English, and 7 homemade music CDs, because you're a musician. So do you still do all that stuff, satsangs, retreats, private sessions?
Yeah. That's what I do.
Are you pretty well known in Holland?
Yeah, I would say
this
so.
This kind of thing?
It's also a small community interested in this kind of stuff, and I'm one of the guys.
Right. You're a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah, something like that.
That's the saying. Okay. And you yourself say that you were sometimes judged as being too confrontational or direct, or more kindly, as very clear. On the other hand, people credit you for your creativity and patience. And then you say funny, right? So what's an example of how you're confrontational?
Yeah, well, usually in interactions, and especially in private interactions, it seems to be my job to point out things people don't want to hear. Which they already know, because I believe, unless you're insane, you have a pretty good feeling or sight of who you are and what you're hiding, or your games, but you usually try to avoid that or get away from it. Well, I will see it. I can't help it. And when people walk through my door, I can say what I want to say. So I wouldn't do that in the street, but I will point things out and confront people with what they're hiding or protecting, or point out judgments or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't like it.
But they come to you voluntarily, so they can always not come again.
Yeah, right. That's why I have a quote on the site, come here at your own risk. I'm not sitting there with people to make friends. They come and we talk about truth or freedom or whatever. Well, okay, let's play ball then.
Is this tendency to sort of see the truth in people something you've always had? Is that part of your personality, or is that something which seemed to dawn after this awakening or after practice through working as a spiritual teacher?
Yeah, both, I think, but mainly because I, at a certain point, started to investigate the workings of my own mind. And when you figure out the basic software of your mind and you open your eyes, you see that it's basically the same in anybody who walks on 2 feet. So the tricks and the belief system and the avoidance strategies, or the cover-ups, because I've seen them in me.
Interesting. And so this investigation of your own mind, I guess, was just sort of an introspective process. And were you able to kind of, as if, be your own psychiatrist, so to speak, and you could see these things and actually kind of resolve them and not do it that way anymore?
In the beginning, it wasn't really, I think, about resolving, but understanding.
Yeah.
Just how it works.
Uh-huh.
I had been avoiding it by drink and smoking pot and whatever, and going to a party and a party and a party and being with friends all the time. And at a certain moment, I realized that I was just running away because I was afraid and felt pretty much fucked up and a little depressed and stuff. So I noticed this running away and avoiding and deflecting, and I saw that it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it gave only a temporary relief. So I was looking at it, and at a certain point I saw I only didn't try one thing, doing nothing and just look. So I stopped these run and hide games and confronted with fears and beliefs and convictions and just looked at them. What were they doing? What is happening here? You know, because therapy and stuff, and people were threatening me with psychiatrists and whatever. I thought they will try to fix stuff, but I don't want to fix it. I want to know what it is. So, because there was something, I don't want to try to change something that I do not understand. You know, so I wanted to know what's what.
Yeah.
That's basically it. So I started looking and listening and feeling instead of trying to change me.
Mm-hmm. And but doing that, it seems, did change you. You probably
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. So because of the looking at it without trying to fix it or avoid it, things changed from within instead of through some model.
Mm-hmm.
or ego-centered, this is bad and it should be good or whatever.
So just bringing awareness to it, really.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that then because I didn't know these terms. Only when I ran into Krishnamurti and Nisargadatta and stuff, the words came. But this process was already happening.
Interesting. Another example of something you just kind of picked up on, you know, without an actual teacher or teaching. Is some old memory of how to operate or something. Now, a lot of people, you know, they drink and they take drugs and they party and do all kinds of other things because they are trying to avoid something and that's uncomfortable, and they're putting their attention in the opposite direction or trying to blur it out with substances. When you decided to really look at this stuff, was it uncomfortable and you had to just sort of work your way through the discomfort?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was afraid, but what was very clear, I already was afraid, so what's the difference? I saw that. I was afraid to feel my fear or my sadness or whatever, but hey, I was already afraid and I didn't like life already, so
what do you have to
I had
lose?
nothing to lose except fear or delusion. So that was okay. And now I thought or felt more something is happening instead of running.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So there are a number of points here that you sent me that as almost as part of your bio, just some different points that you feel are important. I thought I might take those and we could discuss them. So first one is, when spirituality is not alarming, it's not worth mentioning. What do you mean by alarming? What would be an example of spirituality being alarming?
Well, when we discover something, usually there's a shock element to it. I didn't know that, you know. And what I see is a lot of people who are busy with spirituality not to be shocked awakening, but to be soothed or, you know, like smoking pot.
Right.
So it's not about comfort or nice. It's about self-confrontation and looking at things as they are. It's about truth, and truth might hurt or shock you. When you are confronted with your lovelessness, that's a shock. Unless you're a psychopath, obviously, but So there are always shocking and disturbing elements, and we need this friction, I think, to go deeper. So just a lot of the techniques that I saw and the things that are people doing, I believe it's helping them to remain in sleep instead of waking them up. It's not like a bucket of water when you're lying, splash and it'll snap you out of it. No, it's all easy and do some other whatever, something to make you feel good.
What would be some examples of techniques that are just to make you feel good and that don't really help to wake you up?
Almost everything.
Really?
I'm afraid.
All the different spiritual practices?
Yeah, most of it, what I see.
Like, for instance, I've heard you mention meditation in that context, and yet, the world's spiritual traditions and so many, respected teachers have all advocated it as an effective tool. But you're saying it's just a pacifier, maybe, are you?
Yeah, in most cases. I make a distinction in the satsang last week. There's meditation and meditating. Meditating is working, trying to go from here to there. Meditation is just being with what is. It's effortless. It's just being conscious of consciousness now. But most techniques are verbs. So it's the ego who likes to work, and it has to take time, and it has the promise of progress. But reality is. It has nothing to do with evolution or progress or development. That's all these phrases refer to time and effort. Well, ego loves that. When they say it takes you 40 years or 40 lives if you're into reincarnation, ego is happy. Because he knows for 40 years or 40 lives nothing will happen.
Well, I don't think that's the idea necessarily.
Happy.
It's not that nothing will happen. It's that there's a sense that there will be a progression, that there will be continuing development.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I mean. Nothing will happen. It will remain within time, space. It will remain within. So that's great. That's the dream theater. Waking up is about getting out of it.
So let's take an example from Ramana's life. When he was a young lad, teenager, I guess, he had this profound awakening, and he went down to Tiruvannamalai and ended up going up to first he sat in a pit in the basement of a temple and practically died down there, but finally somebody dragged him out, and he ended up going up to a cave on the mountain and spending, I don't know, a decade at least sitting in some form of meditation, deep samadhi or something, and presumably it was necessary for him to do that or he wouldn't have done it. And then eventually he came out and began interacting with people. So that, I don't think you would say that was an example of that he was just numbing himself or pacifying himself.
No, but you assume that he was meditating.
Well, he was doing something with his eyes closed in a cave. For
he was sitting.
Sitting,
he was
just being.
He was just being. I don't think he was doing anything. He just sat down.
Okay. So if we...
But the belief doing is so strong that we have to interpret it. He didn't talk for years, and somebody said to him, if I read correctly, were you taking the vow of silence? No, there was nothing to say.
Yeah.
That seems just to me. He wasn't trying anything. He just was. And we make of it, because we believe in all kinds of spiritual stuff, that he was doing something in order to get something. I don't think he was.
Yeah, I don't think he was either. I mean, not that I, knew the guy, but, I would presume that...
Me neither.
I'm sure he didn't have some kind of thing, I better sit here in this cave for a decade and then I'll be ready to do something. I think he was just drawn within spontaneously and just following his natural impulse. I mean, And you know, nature was doing it. He wasn't monkeying around.
He had no purpose.
Yeah.
He just sat there, and he wouldn't have minded if he would have died there.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody dragged him out and started to feed him. He didn't ask for food.
Right. People just took it upon themselves to take care of him.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
And then they locked him up in the ashram, and he tried to get away a few times, but well, tough luck.
Yeah. I actually like your definition of meditation. I mean, to you know, to be honest, I've been meditating for almost 50 years, and but the nature of it is kind of like you describe. It's not an effort to do anything or get any place or anything else. It's just sort of, you know, there's a technique, there's a practice but it's really a matter of just being natural, sitting in presence. And
but it's strange to use a technique for that.
Well,
you know, the silence
mm-hmm.
is already here. If you just give your attention to this silence, you don't need any technique. It's already here, and it will fill up your body within a second. Whilst when I'm doing a technique, I'm making it of time.
Maybe.
It's bizarre to me.
Yeah. I mean, the Buddha, I don't know what you want to call it, but the Buddha meditated, quote unquote, all of his life after he had his enlightenment. And I'm sure the silence was already there for him all the time, but for some reason he chose to, you know, spend some time eyes closed or whatever in meditation, just like we spend time eyes closed in sleep. It has some effect to just allow one's full attention to be in that, as opposed to, you know, yeah, the silence is already here, but I'm busy, active, doing things. It just, you know, it has its own value.
Well, keep doing it then.
I will, don't worry. Some people have used the same argument with me.
I won't worry.
Unless I don't, you know, that could happen. But as long as it seems fruitful. Okay, I think we've done about that point pretty well. And feel free, anytime I'm going on or not going on, and you have some thought in mind that I'm not asking, just come out with it. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this one I take possible exception with. You say burnout is never about work, it's a spiritual crisis. Not feeling and listening leads to inauthenticity, which at a certain point makes the soul scream for change. Yeah, but I mean, tell that to an elementary school teacher in the inner city who's dealing with a very unruly classroom of kids that are just, you know, who come from, you know, very stressed, broken homes and so on, and who there's a term, teacher burnout. So is that a spiritual crisis those people are going through, or can there really be circumstances like Syria? The war is going on there for so many years. People are living in these horrible bombed out cities, and they all suffer from PTSD and all kinds of psychological problems just because of the sheer stress of it. Are they not feeling or listening? Are they inauthentic, or are there really legitimate situations in which one can get burned out by circumstances?
It could be, but I would only know if I would talk to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say anything about it. But when the teacher, when we started about the burnout thing, would come to me, I know for sure that within 10 minutes I could point out a few things, or he would become aware of a few things before. For instance, in his relationship, that would become clear that he's in a relationship he doesn't want to be in, but he just keeps going along with it. Or he had a signal, stop this work, or stop working for so many hours, or whatever. And because of fear, he just moved on.
Mm.
I'm sure of this, because I've had people here from different walks of life who seemed burnout.
Mm.
And there was always something going on, signals that they had ignored because of fear or money or whatever. But I cannot answer things in big generalizations about people in Aleppo. I never go there, so I don't know what is happening, or it's difficult to say.
That's a really good point, actually. I mean, I think that there are some generalizations one can make about Aleppo or you know, that town in Baghdad that just got liberated from ISIS. I forget the name, but it starts with an M, or it had been bombed for years. And, you know, there is a high incidence of burnout and stress and PTSD in those places. But the point you're making, I mean, there might be teachers who thrive in the inner city classroom because it's like their dharma, you know, it's what they should be doing. They're good at it. They love it.
Yes.
Whereas others are just doing it for the salary, and they maybe really should be doing something else.
Yes, exactly.
They're going to get burned out because they're not where they ought to be.
A lot of people are not where they ought to be, or doing things that they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Well, are in relationships they don't want to be in, have trouble in their families that they really want to get rid of, but they are scared to say something. Or, you know, when we believe to be a separate entity, a shitload of trouble is coming for free with it.
Yeah.
It's always the case. This basic misunderstanding is the cause of a lot of trouble, including war.
Yeah. Explain how that is the case. I think I know what you mean, but how would you say it causes war?
On a simple level, if I don't believe in separateness, and I really feel that you and I are not two, I wouldn't, the thought wouldn't come up to hurt you or steal something from you. That would be insane, because I would be stealing from myself.
Yeah, I was going to bring that point up earlier when you were talking about compassion, you know, we were talking about cutting your finger. I mean, Jesus said, you know, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, the key to that obviously is seeing your neighbor as yourself, and then you're gonna love them.
Right.
You would no more attack them than you would, you know, attack yourself.
Well, so when this separateness drops away, it is impossible to hate. For instance, it is impossible to say another group of individuals are inferior. It wouldn't come up.
Yeah.
You know, so, but from the separate standpoint, these people are bad and we are good, and my God is better than your God. It's all imagined, but we don't want to look at that. You know, I believe in Santa Claus and you don't, so you got to. It's tragic and funny at the same time.
Yeah, I like that point. Yeah, I think that there's a certain, this whole thing about my way is the best and everybody else is going to hell, there's a certain sort of insecurity beneath that, I think.
Sure.
There's this ego aggrandizement that, you know,
of course,
my thing has got to be the best, and they hang on to that, and everything else threatens it, so there's an antagonism.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, good point. I like this next point. Self-inquiry is for internal use only, not for beating others down or to be used as an excuse for lousy behavior. Good one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of related with the previous point, you know, with the Advaita Bible or the Holy Book or the Quran in our hands. We can use these books for any purpose, any ego purpose. You can always find a quote to excuse yourself or to diminish somebody or to whatever, to make up excuses or motivations for your egocentric activity. So that's what people do. It's not the book themselves. The books don't matter. But that's what we do. We will excuse ourselves and do horrible things and then rationalize it. So I think it's important when we're doing this inquiry and I'm discovering something in myself, lovelessness or egocentrism, I shouldn't immediately run to my wife or whatever and say, you are egotistic because it's working this way and you should look into that. This happens a lot. My previous partner, I forced her, I tried to force her into self-inquiry because it was working for me, but she was learning in a different way.
Yeah.
It took me a little a while to figure that out. And my way wasn't better. It was just different, and it suited me. You know, so.
Yeah. There's this phrase, the Advaita police, you've probably heard that, where people are kind of...
No, I didn't. But,
yeah. It kind of came out of the whole Papaji crowd where, you know, people were all laying trips on others for not being non-dual enough or not using the right terminology. Like, you know, you couldn't say, you know, please pass the salt without somebody saying who wants the salt. And
oh, boy.
that kind of thing.
Oh. Yeah, well, there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's even worse than I thought.
I think maybe that doesn't happen so much anymore, but it was, a lot of people made jokes about it. Jeff Foster even made this real funny video of these cartoon characters having a walk, and one says, "Look at the beautiful tree," and the other character says, "There is no tree, there is no beauty," you know, and yada yada. It's kind of this whole thing. I don't know if you would have the... Oh, you got to stop smoking, man. It's going to kill you.
Yeah, I hope so.
Here's a question that came in. I don't, you know, feel free if you have no experience with this, just say, I don't know, and we'll move on. But a fellow named Jared from St. Paul, Minnesota in the U.S. asks, can you describe some experiences with Kundalini, if you have had any? If so, do you have any tips to deal with the side effects?
I could describe those experiences, but I'm not really interested in it. Mm-hmm. And I would really be very careful with all this kind of stuff.
How so?
Because usually, because of the dangers of it, usually it's an ego who wants something and try to release all these energies, and all kinds of accidents, energetic accidents can happen.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
And if it already happened, mm-hmm. just try to feel what happens without involvement, without trying to fix anything. The energy system is pure intelligence. It knows what to do, when to do it, and in which session. And all this energetic stuff, and I'm trained in it for 4 years, so mm-hmm. Trust me, all this working with it's ego manipulation of a system we don't understand. Please leave it to its own device. Mm-hmm. Things will happen in the right succession at the right time. Relax. Don't meddle with that.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, particularly I would warn against doing something like intense pranayama or something to try to awaken your Kundalini.
Yes,
you might get in trouble.
You shouldn't do that.
Right.
You shouldn't do that. It would be better to investigate, why do I want this? What do I want from it? What am I trying to get rid of? Or what am I trying to get? Investigate in what you want to get or get rid of. That is far more productive than fucking with your energy system. You don't know what you're doing, and the energy guys who will try to help you, they don't know either.
Unfortunately, there are some people who actually haven't done anything. They haven't been interested in spirituality, haven't done spiritual practices, and yet they have some kind of Kundalini awakening.
Yeah, sure.
And they don't even know what it is when it first happens, but it really messes up their lives. Do you have any advice for them?
The same. Try to feel what happens. Just be aware of it and allow it to restructure itself. Don't panic, but it all depends on how scared you are, or how mature you are, or whatever, and what other things that happen. But don't try to forcefully fix it. There's so much violence in these so-called spiritual techniques, trying to awaken something when it's not the time yet. Trying to calm my system when it doesn't want to be calm. It sounds spiritual. It feels like violence to me. I would want to know why is, for instance, you have the thing of grounding. I need to be grounded. Then people are doing all kinds of exercises to be grounded. Instead of investigating, why doesn't my system want to be here?
How would you investigate
that?
I'm
forcing. Just a second. I'm trying to force a system who is afraid to really be here now. I'm trying to force it to be here, and I call it spiritual. Oh my God. I would look into it and try to ask myself honestly, or with somebody who has a clear mind, what is going on that I'm afraid to really be here? There's a cause. If the cause is removed, I will just be here and I don't need to ground. You know, when my heater is leaking, I'm not filling it up with water every day. I will look where the leak is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will have to do grounding exercises until why would I want to do that? Pushing a ball under the water.
That's
all
a
the time.
good analogy. I like that one. Yeah.
As soon as I stop my effort, it will jump up again.
So it sounds like, as a general principle, you're not a big fan of effort, you know, any kind of force or unnaturalness.
Yes.
That can be, we've established that, and I agree with you on that, for what it's worth. And you're also an advocate of bringing awareness or attention to things rather than deflecting it or avoiding it in any way, and that's worked for you, and it works for your students, I guess. Yeah.
And it only when they're there. If you really see for yourself that running away, avoiding, deflecting is not working, then the maturity will come to stop it. Only when it's really seen, not because you want to, because if you only understand this and you want to stop it, you won't. But if you have really seen it, understood with a capital U, it will drop away. Because at that moment, it's clear to you that it is insane to prolong a strategy that bears no fruit. But only when it's seen.
To get a concrete example, can you think of an instance with one of your students, if you call them students, who had something of some sort, and they were avoiding or suppressing or doing something like that, and the problem was persisting, and you helped them kind of see it clearly for the first time, maybe, and resolve it. Can you think of an example of something like that, just to make the whole thing more clear to people?
Well, a very clear example. A little while back, somebody doing
cocaine,
and I've no moral cocaine. I have no moral issue with that. But we talked about what was going on, and she could see at a certain moment that there were certain times that she'd like to do that. So I suggested to her, okay, now stop and just look at it, what is happening. So when you feel it, when you feel the urge coming, just say to your ego, you'll get it in an hour, but now I'm going to look and feel what is actually happening. And she could face a certain unrest or restlessness coming up, and it had to do with some relational stuff, and she could look at it and didn't run away from it, felt it completely, and the urge to use coke dropped away.
That's a good one.
Cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay.
Because if you say I shouldn't use it anymore, or it's good or bad to use whatever, chocolate, TV, music, then you make a conflict of it. But you can also postpone it and just look at it, feel it, investigate into it, and maybe you have a surprise insight or something changes. She understood it really.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure, but I think with Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, they don't come in there and just say, all right, I'm never going to do this again my whole life. It's more like you live each day at a time, each moment at a time, and you don't worry about tomorrow, but today it's the time you have to deal with.
Yeah, and that's basically true. Some people come because they have had anxiety attacks or something for a long time. So they will start telling me, I am having this for 10 years. That's not true. You're not in a panic attack of 10 years. Something like that doesn't exist.
Right.
You have to deal with the panic attack if it's there right now. What are you doing with it? Do you place it in time immediately and make a huge problem out of it? Or is it just the energy moving at this moment? Can you look at it without judgment? Without making, even without the label of fear? Because when we say fear, it's already in the bad corner. So there was the other day, or a few days ago, we had fear, and we could look at it together without the mind commenting, and he started smiling, because what he was feeling was a very lively, powerful energy moving. He liked it. But before, it was labeled fear, so yeah, and it's making my life difficult and whatever. But when looking at it without all the stories, it was just a powerful, lively, it was life force. It's not a problem.
Yeah, that's good. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Byron Katie, just loving what is and not embellishing it with all kinds of stories and complications.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but we problem, I don't know what the word is in English. Never mind.
Okay.
We make a problem out of everything.
Yeah. People know what you mean by that. There's a teacher in Australia named Sailor Bob Adams, and I think he has this phrase of, what's wrong with right now unless you think about it. It's.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah. Okie dokie. So let's see. Oh, that's interesting. This is the next little point I was going to read here. It summarizes what you've just been saying. Reality is never a problem until we start to project our beliefs, fears, expectations, and judgments onto it.
Well, yeah.
That's the point. Okay. Here's another one. You are far too much interested in solutions, and in the meantime, it is your mind, what you believe, who is creating the trouble in the first place.
Right. That's another thing that when one observes one's mind, mind is a very fun word to me. To mind, I have something against something. That's what it means. So I think that's funny. Okay, whatever. But what is here is never the issue. Any situation is valuable less. There's no value until I start projecting a value into it. This is good, this is bad, this is beneficial, this is, So it's basically the past giving commentaries on what is present, and then we run away from the situation to the future where the solution may be. So we're always moving away from the issue at hand, so we don't look at the issue, investigate into what it is. No, we look for a solution. It's always over there. And that's why a lot of people don't learn, but become very good at moving away from what is in terms of solutions or distractions or comfort or whatever. And the core problem just remains and keeps making problems. And the essence, of course, is I'm a separate being.
I won't even comment on that. That's good. I'll just read your next point.
All right.
You say, unresolved issues keep you from being truly present and real. Avoidance is all these points are related. Avoidance is one of the most weakening attributes of identification with the mind. Can you ever get to the bottom of it? I mean, is there ever going to be a complete resolution of issues, or is there a never-ending supply of them to look at and resolve?
That's a good question. How I'm experiencing it now. Sometimes things arise, but it's never perceived as a problem. So there is no interest in a solution, and some tendencies of this Hans character remain, and some others might change. but there is no self-improvement here. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think you are. I think, I don't know, it's another one of those paradoxical catch-22 kind of things. And maybe it has to, maybe it's important, like, which is the cart and which is the horse, you know? I mean, there was a Zen story about this student who was, you know, kind of sitting and meditating and meditating and meditating, and the teacher came and picked up a tile or something. It was just floor tile, and he started polishing it, polishing it, and polishing it. And you know, the student stopped and said, "What are you doing that for?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to make it into a mirror." And he said, "You'll never make it into. It's a floor tile. It can't become a mirror." So there's something about, you know, trying to endlessly improve or fix the relative situation, which is inherently,
Yes.
yeah, it's relative.
Yeah, it's infinite.
Yeah. But then
The relative is infinite, you know, so. And it's not like awakening is not the product of cleaning up. So there are a lot of schools, obviously, purification and energetic cleansing and whatever. And if you're clean enough, you will awaken. It's not like that. Which does not mean that in some stages of somebody's life, some cleaning up could be useful. Of course it could.
Right.
But it's not when I'm 80% clean, the thing will click and I will know that I have never existed. It's not like that.
Yeah, here's what you said about that in one of your articles. You mentioned two requirements. The recognition of true nature, for the recognition of true nature, a suitable energy system to let the recognition sink through is valuable. So in that sense, you know, we're saying that there is some value to, you know, Jesus said, don't pour new wine into old wineskins, you know. There is some value in having an energy system, a nervous system that is suitable for the realization. I mean, if you're doing cocaine every day or something, probably you're hampering your chances or your ability to have that realization. And you say, for most people, it's best to walk both paths, ripening the energy system, you know, which is becoming conscious and cleaning up, and exposing yourself to direct teaching or experience. So it's kind of a both thing.
Yeah, at least for a while.
For a while.
Because the danger of the danger, of course, of the cleansing thing and the maturing thing is that we will get attached to that.
Make it an endless project.
Yes.
Yeah.
And oh well, that's fun. And if that needs to happen, all right, you know, I won't complain.
Yeah.
But that's the danger of that. The danger of only using the other side is that people have a tendency to avoid real issues because it's not advitic.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have to do anything with it. I'm beating my wife, and that doesn't have to do anything with it. Well,
yeah, there's no
try
me,
to do that when
there's
I'm
no
present.
wife, and you know, it's just
Yes, exactly. Which is a bunch of bollocks,
right.
Because it is used as an excuse. And as soon as we use a quote which is in itself true, but we use it as an excuse, it becomes untrue.
Yeah.
Because it's never the words, obviously. I'm not saying to myself that there is no separateness. I'm seeing that. You know, it's not a belief system or a conviction or a phrase or something. I'm seeing that, and I started talking about it, and to my surprise, people were interested, and it turned out to be a job. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in other words, you're not just, for you, both in your own experience and as a teacher, it's not an intellectual concept or something, and you can't, you know, you can't live it on the basis of merely a concept any more than you can nourish yourself by thinking about food. You know, it's,
exactly.
Yeah, it's an experiential thing.
Yes.
You say
just
that.
As much. Sorry.
No, you continue.
Well, just as much as somebody now may believe, of course I'm a separate individual, which is in most people, it's so deep, this conviction. There's no way around it. Well, when it flips, the other thing is just as solid. There's no way to doubt it. It's crystal clear and amazing that the others don't see. But you cannot fake it. I cannot put together separateness anymore. Will never happen. I will always see the cracks and start laughing, and so.
Yeah, that's a good point. You make a point here that there are two sides to ripening, before awakening and after. So I think we've talked quite a bit about before in terms of, you know, the process you went through of looking at stuff rather than avoiding it, and so on. And then what would be the nature of it after awakening?
Well, we talked about, or the name came up, Nisargadatta, and one of his statements in a certain situation where somebody awakened in his presence, and he said something like, yeah, it's a mango, but it still needs to ripen, you cannot eat it yet. So what you see, and what I've also have seen happening the past 20 years, people are waking up, but it's all shaky and still flimsy and unstable, and they will jump to conclusions, and some old tendencies will have to dry out, or I don't know how you say that, have to pan out. So I usually say, especially when they have an inclination to start talking to their friends or whatever, don't. Shut up for a year or 2 or 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
Just let it sink in, and don't burn all the energy immediately by talking about it and everything, because, well, that's what unripe mangoes tend to do. So that's, and I can see now in myself, if I'm on my own dream life, that in the beginning it was, you know, the energy was moving all kinds of ways, and it's much more stable or complete
Integrated.
than 10 years ago or whatever. Yeah.
And do you feel like it's an ongoing process? Like 5 years from now, you'll say it's more stable and complete than it was 5 years ago?
It's possible.
I mean, has that been your experience over the past?
Yeah. But I must say the differences get harder to measure. In the beginning, you get the big chunks, and now there's more. If there's something happening, it seems more like a sort of fine tuning, or
more subtle.
And it's all full automatic. I'm not doing anything. I'm doing nothing spiritual. I'm totally unspiritual.
Yeah, by your definition. I think.
Yeah, in the sense that I'm not using any spiritual products, barely reading any books, thrillers.
Right.
You know, I'm not meditating. I'm not doing shiatsu or whatever. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, it's just an automatic process. In fact, you say in one of your articles, the ripening after awakening is somewhat different. It's a mostly spontaneous, continuous dismantling of all kinds of leftovers. But there is little or no resistance to this anymore because the ego has lost its dominance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very well put.
Yeah. Who wrote that? Yeah. Like I don't know if you ever heard, there was this woman in the United States and quite a while back who called herself Peace Pilgrim. You ever hear of her? And she just walked around. Yeah, she's this older woman. She just walked around the country, the entire country, you know, with just simple clothing and a pair of tennis shoes, and no money, no nothing, and completely relied upon the providence of nature and strangers and everything to survive. And anyway, she, in her little book, which is remarkable, she has this sort of chart of how she feels spiritual progress progresses. And there's kind of like, it's sort of a slow rise before awakening when the ego is involved and actually interfering with it. But after awakening, it sort of rises much more dramatically when you get out of the way and let nature run the show. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's kind of what you're saying, right?
For a while it will do that.
Yeah.
And then it starts to level again, I would say. Nothing, the past years, nothing much is happening.
Yeah. Now, I wonder, this is a little bit of a hypothetical and provocative question, but I wonder if it's leveled for you, because in the context of what you are doing and in the context of your life, there's really no cause or impetus for it to rise much more, but that theoretically there are, many degrees to which it could rise, if that were your destiny, if that were your tendency, if you had the inclination or the desire for it, there's a lot more possibility, but in the context of your life, you've just sort of plateaued off and are just living it. It's just
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. But from my perspective, complete is complete. I cannot take anything off or add to it. So, and if it has to change in my dream life, okay.
Yeah.
If life says that way, or drop this or whatever, okay. So in that sense, things on the surface of my life have changed. My mother got demented, somebody died, stuff. But it doesn't distract anything from this completeness or add to it. So that's more what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's very well put. It's like in mathematics, if you have infinity, you can add something to it or subtract something to it, but it's still infinity, It doesn't change the essential nature of it.
Yes. And that's always present and always here and always effortless. So
here's another point. I'm just thinking. These are just little things as I was reading all of your essays that I thought, that's interesting. I'd like to talk about that. So I copied and pasted it into a file.
Okay.
So here's another one that jumped out at me. You said, fulfillment is the result of not doing, the simple and direct experience of, for lack of better words, an energetic conscious space that is already there, the direct relaxation in being now. So fulfillment. Do you consider yourself fulfilled? Do you feel fulfilled?
Yeah, the fulfillment is here.
Yeah.
And I'm not sad of it. So always, yeah. Does that mean that Hans' character is always happy or never grumpy? No, of course not. But that happens in this fulfillment or completeness or infinity, like you just said. So there's no resistance on being grumpy, and then there's no resistance in being happy.
Do you prefer happiness to grumpiness?
No.
It's whatever happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I must say, when grumpiness would totally go, I might miss it because I like the energy.
What is how does your partner like you best, grumpy or happy?
It depends on whether she's grumpy or happy.
Yeah. So, like, what if you get sick? What if you get like pneumonia or bronchitis or something like that? Do you feel, in some sense, less fulfilled, less?
No.
No.
I have a hernia. Well, that hurts.
Yeah.
But it doesn't affect my mood, and it certainly doesn't affect completeness, because completeness has no backbone, so it cannot have a hernia. It's only the body.
Yep.
And as you know, I think when a body gets older, it has these little things.
Sure, things happen.
Yeah, well, I don't care, basically.
Good. Here's another one. And people listening, remember that you can send in questions if you want. There's a question form under upcoming interviews on batgap.com, down at the bottom of that page. Here's another little statement that jumped out at me. There's a big difference between love and need. I think this is actually kind of a big one, actually, which we could talk about for a few minutes. What do you have to say to elaborate on that?
When you listen to a lot of the pop songs, and you know, I love you and I can't live without you, and
right.
You make me feel complete. That's not love. Then that's need, in the sense of you need something to feel secure or complete, or something giving you attention or making you feel good about yourself. That's need. And when it's about, oh, let's do this, baby, that's called being horny. Well, there's nothing wrong with being horny, but let's not call it making love. It's got nothing to do with it. You cannot make love. Love is what you are. Love is, for me, another word of consciousness or beingness or whatever. And it doesn't do exclusivity or if you love me, you should, which is emotional blackmail.
Yeah.
So love doesn't ask questions, doesn't set limits, doesn't tell you what to do or what not to do or how to behave. That's not love. That's the ego trying to force you or somebody else or himself. So I call that need. And it's a big one, mistaking love for need. A need for love.
Would one way to explain it be to say that love is characterized by a tendency to give without expectation of return, whereas need is primarily focused on getting?
Yeah, that's true. But ego is always giving or taking. But love, there is no separateness. There's nothing to give or take.
Because it's a fullness.
The ocean again, it doesn't give its water to the wave. It is the wave.
Yeah.
It's undivided.
And if a river flows into it, it doesn't become more ocean-like. It's still the ocean.
Yes, and it's not. And it didn't make any effort to get the river.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get you to me.
I can't live like without this river.
Right. That would be insane.
Yeah.
So love sweeps away the me. And that is what truth does and freedom does. It's the absence of me.
Well, just to take a personal example, and again, it's hypothetical, but, how do you feel like, you have a partner, she seems like a very nice person. Presumably you love her. And how would you feel if she decided to leave and fell in love with somebody else? Would there be any sort of lack or attachment or anything like that, or would the fullness really not be impacted by that?
It would be weird to say anything about it until it's there.
Till it happens.
So
yeah.
I don't know.
Anything like that in the past since your awakening?
Yeah, and that surprised me.
In what way?
That something like that agitated me for a week or so.
Yeah. You thought you were beyond agitation?
No. I don't think I had that conclusion, but just I felt this turmoil in my heart and was looking at it. Oh, okay. Maybe the thought was there, but I never made that conclusion. It will not touch me anymore or something like that.
Right.
But there was turmoil, and the immediate tendency was to look at it. So after a few days or a week maybe, and not constantly a week, but it came up and went, and and then it was done.
Yeah, I suspect you must have processed it a lot faster than many people would, because you already have that tendency, you know, to look at things and really just not avoid them, just go into them and
Yes.
resolve them. Yeah. Because some people can.
I would even say, especially in an earlier period of inquiry, I tried to make it as hard as possible for me. So if I was afraid of something, I would just blow up the story and see what would come. So you're in love with somebody, or you have a wife, and you imagine her doing the whole hockey team and see what happens. Instead of, I don't hope she will fall in love with somebody.
Yeah.
Just when something happens, just picture it as bad as possible, if you can handle it, and just feel through it. Just look at it, feel it.
Yeah, that's an interesting technique.
Then you're done. Then you're done pretty quickly. If you can take it. So, you know, there has to be awareness and space to be able to do that.
Yeah, certain strength or capacity.
It's not for everyone.
Right. But it's interesting. I'll think about that one. I may use it myself. Just exaggerate it and see it. Yeah. Huh.
And if you picture that stuff, anything, a few times at its worst, and you can really stay with it and just look at it and feel it, all the tension will drop away after a few times. You know, and the fear is gone.
Good one.
That's why I'm more an advocate of self-confrontation than all this feel-good stuff. I feel good when it's true and when it's free. That is good. Not to make me feel good. I can have a couple of beers and it makes me feel good for an hour, you know, and then it doesn't. It's not bringing anything.
Here's a paragraph that's a little longer. I'm going to read it, and you can talk about it. It says, you say, the danger in saying, quote, there is no person, end quote, and, quote, everything is consciousness, end quote, is that we leave everything the way it is and unwittingly stay in our comfort zone and continue to take part in an old system that's essentially anti-living and has devastating effects on human nature as well as on nature. Human relations as well as on nature. Focusing solely on the outer world is tricky as well. Let's find the middle ground and rediscover acting justly based on consciousness and experiencing all from great peace, keeping an eye on what's needed in our environment, acting out of love, ever generous, and realizing we are not separated from Mother Earth, our social environment, the world. So the reason I copied that one is that it's a point about really the implications, I think, of spirituality or awakening for the world and worldly problems, such as the environment and all kinds of other problems in the world, social problems. And you know, sometimes people polarize that one and you know, think that, you know, the two really have no relationship to one another, and that spiritual people think, you know, they just want to focus on that. Activists think that spirituality is some kind of escape, sitting there with your eyes closed. But I think you're saying that you're advocating a more comprehensive, inclusive thing where, you know, you elaborate on it. I've said enough.
Well, to make it simple, we have two eyes. And I would say a true adult human being would use one eye for the world and one eye for infinity. And maybe we need to wake up twice to our true nature and to how systems are working in the world. And if I know that I am also my surroundings, so if that's not separate, I will not throw acid in the yard or in the forest.
Right.
Because it's my own backyard, wherever it is. you know, it's insane. Not morally bad, it's just weird. So if there's a real change in this dropping away of feeling of separateness, I expect, but maybe I'm wrong, that it will also adjust how we live or how we deal with the environment, with nature, with other people. Like I said in the beginning, when I really know, not when I think, but when I really know I am you, I will not attack you or steal your car. Or it's weird, you know. So it should have an effect. Not that that is the goal, but it's a byproduct.
Yeah, and an important one. You know, I think you're right. I mean, I ride around town on my bicycle a lot. It's a small town, and I like getting the exercise. And, you know, I see all things people have thrown on the street, cigarette packs and bottles and stuff like that. And I usually can't help but stop and pick them up and put them in my baskets and bring them home and recycle them, just because it's, I don't like, it's like that doesn't belong in, if the environment is me, that doesn't belong in me. And the people who put it there have an insensitivity to the environment. They're not seeing it in a unified way.
Exactly. So we walk the dog. We live in a forest, or on the verge of a forest, and we walk the dog every day, and we pick up stuff too, and sometimes even purposely take a bag with us, because, well, there's always bottles and cans or couches which won't get into the bag, but then we call somebody. Yeah, that's weird from my perspective, but I also understand that these people that do that, well, they can't be blamed for not feeling one with the rest, because that's not their awareness, you know. So what I said earlier, there is no hate towards this, a little sadness though.
Yeah, I think you have a really good point, though. I mean, there are many people who fear for the continuation of the human race because there's so much damage being done to the environment and so on. And, you know, if there is some kind of more widespread spiritual awakening taking place, which it seems to me there is, then maybe this is nature's way of, nature's antidote to what we've been doing, you know, and it's going to hopefully create a mass psychology that will be much more sensitive to Mother Earth, and, you know, won't consider it merely a resource that is inexhaustible, which it's not. Yeah.
Well, I don't believe that, but...
You don't believe that'll happen?
No.
Why not? You're an example of it in your own life, and, you know, what if you...
No. Why? You talk to these kind of people. You know, you don't talk to the hooligan who likes to smash somebody's jaw.
True, I haven't...
And there's more of them.
There is, you know, but there's so many things that have changed in society over the years that you didn't think it was going to happen. I mean, you know, racial segregation, that. But I mean, you know, huge strides in racial segregation. Most of the U.S. cities in the South have black mayors now, whereas before, you know, they wouldn't even be allowed to use the same bathroom. And you know, gay marriage and just all kinds of things that have just changed, and people never thought that would happen. So I'm optimistic.
Okay, great, good for you. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not pessimistic either.
Maybe we should place a bet.
But basically, I wouldn't.
I'm just joking.
And I wouldn't really, for that matter, mind so much if humanity got extinct. Who cares? The dinosaurs are gone.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about humans.
Right. It's a bigger picture than that.
Maybe the planet is better off without us. I don't know.
Could be. And there will come a time when that happens. I mean, it might be a long ways off, might not.
Yeah.
It will happen.
It will happen. Yeah. If we believe the universe and time to be true, I'm told the sun has an expiration date. So
it does. In 5 billion years, it'll expand and the Earth will melt. So we'll have a real serious global warming problem.
So And it won't help to flee to Mars.
Nope. A couple of questions have come in. Here's one from Pamela in Madrid. She's saying that you say in one of your writings, becoming aware isn't necessarily pleasant. It will always bring clarity, though. And she asks, what is clarity? Can you explain the difference?
The difference between
between pleasantness, I think, and clarity.
Well, clarity is clear and pleasantness is pleasant.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, awakening might bring clarity to some unpleasantness.
Yes, for instance, like we talked about already, when you're face to face with your own aggression, for instance, or having to be right, that can become clear to you, that you're doing that and why you're doing that and all that it entails. That is unpleasant. But in this clarity, when you can stay with it, it may drop away, and then this clarity may become pleasant.
Yeah.
But confrontation, well, sometimes I make this strange equation. You lived in a half-dark room all the time, and all of a sudden the light goes on. Then you will see the mess very clearly. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of clarity, but there's also mess.
Yeah.
Because you put a lot of stuff under the carpet and in the corners, and you wouldn't be seeing that because the room was half dark. Now the lights are full on, okay. Then you see how you live, where you live, what you're doing, what you're attached to, what you're trying to get. It might be a shocker.
Yeah, but you couldn't clean up the room until you had the light on.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's going to be a nicer room to live in once you've cleaned it up.
Yes, yes. Or maybe the lights go on and you get that you gotta get out. That's also a possibility. Don't make it into a nice room, but just go.
What would that relate to in terms of the metaphor? Leaving the room.
No, I don't know. It just came up.
Sounds more like an avoidance thing.
No, not trying to rebuild something. That's another thing. It's not like you are somebody and then you're awakened somebody who's going for different goals. You know, the becoming falls away. Mm-hmm. There's only presence. The whole thing of becoming, so getting a better room in this metaphor, is still a becoming, a working on something. But when awakening is complete, there is no working on whatever in a psychological or spiritual sense. Right. You might be working in your garden or on your car or with your synthesizer, but there's no becoming, there's no goal. I'm not going anywhere.
Things are kind of running on automatic more.
Yes. Yeah. And the Ramana Maharshi, we talked about him earlier, he had one quote that I love very much. Your job is to be, not to be this or that. Mm-hmm. That sums it up quite nicely.
Yeah.
So music may occur, but it's not the goal to produce a song or be a musician or whatever. The music came back 7-8 years ago, and CDs or songs started to emerge, and they patched themselves together in some homemade CDs. Things were written and they got a cover and were called a book, but I never sat down to write a book.
You didn't feel like the doer.
No.
Yeah.
When I'm truthful, I never feel I'm doing anything. And these instances that I do, something is off. Because work, in my dictionary, means effort, means forcing.
Do you ever have situations...
And I don't like it.
No. Do you ever have situations that you have a difficult decision to make, or it has moral implications or something, and you're weighing this versus that, and you don't know what to do. Do you ever do that kind of thing, or the way you function, it just doesn't work that way anymore?
No. When such a thing arises, there's an automatic stepping out of it. Because when I want to have clear what to do, I must not be part of the equation. I don't know if this makes sense.
I think it does, but so then what happens? You just wait and see how it's going to work out, and then eventually the right thing kind of presents itself, or what?
Yeah, I know that I will know what to do when it's
right
necessary.
Time. Yeah.
Yes, and when I don't know, it's probably not the moment to know, so I don't worry about it.
Okay, good.
But if you get involved, then your fears and desires and whatnot get mixed into the situation, and then clarity is out of the question. So what works best, and it's not something that I do, but it just happens, there's a sort of zooming out.
Yeah.
And all interests drop away, and then there's just this energetic constellation, this situation, and the right thing, or one of the right things, will occur. And because everything is already complete, it basically doesn't matter if it goes that way or that way. I'm not losing anything or gaining anything.
Yeah.
So it basically doesn't matter, but not in an indifferent manner, but because there are more right actions possible on any subject.
Yeah.
Where the ego always thinks this is right and that is wrong. No, there are more. When you see it in musical terms, you can do a bass line on a synthesizer or a bass guitar, or Eric, my friend, could do it on his trumpet, or just hum it. It's all baseline possibilities.
Yeah.
But sometimes this sounds nice, and the other time that sounds nice. But that there's a song coming up in itself is nice, but it's not important. If it not gets recorded, the stars won't drop from the sky. You know, we always exaggerate our importance, and what we do, we make it so it's not. We're used, because consciousness like to entertain itself. So a guy over there, a guy over here, and they're talking about this important stuff.
I like that. There's a saying I heard once, which is that humility is the quality of not insisting that things happen any particular way. You know?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. For good, yes.
Yeah.
And it's also very nice when you like something to happen in a certain way, and then it turns out different, and it's much more beautiful than you could have imagined.
Very good point. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
You had a limited expectation.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, good point. Okay, here's another question that came in. This one is from Amanda from Tampa, Florida. She asks, can you describe how creativity and the creative process are linked with consciousness? You're a creative guy, you're a musician, so this is a good one for you. How would you describe that? Have you become more creative, do you think, as a result of awakening?
Less egoic. So when I made music when I was in my teens or early 20s, I was much more scared to let somebody hear something that I made or wanted rewards for it because it was cool. That's not there anymore, so it has become more free. Yeah, but again, I'm not 20 anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't want anything of it. I don't have to perform. I wouldn't even want to. I'm not looking for a YouTube hit or whatever. You know, it's just something I sometimes like to do. And so Doggy.
Dog.
Creativity is more often than not ego-based. And that's a shame, but I understand it. But it's mostly somebody who wants to make something and then show off. My girlfriend calls a lot of music Me Too music. If you catch the drift.
Yeah.
I want to be famous too. Right. You know, that's not the love for music, but it's the love for fame, for instance. You know, so there are different levels. So the freer it is, the more creative it is, I think. Whether it's nicer, that's something else entirely. It's a matter of taste maybe or whatever. But if there's nothing in the way, it can flow really freely. The danger is, the other side of it is, there is no necessity. You know, when I thought I was somebody, I had to make music. Now I don't.
Yeah.
Because the energy that comes when I hear a melody or a lyric or whatever, there has to be a lot of energy in it to make me go to the recorder or to the little studio to do it. Because there's no egoic need to make something. So that's been bad for music the last year because I didn't do anything. I did buy a nice synthesizer, but I didn't record anything because I don't feel it now.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's an answer to the question at all.
I think it's a good answer, and Susan can, Amanda can follow up if she wants to. But yeah. And it occurred to me as you were speaking that maybe, you know, Me Too music would appeal to Me Too people, and you know, kind of music that's made without ego would appeal to people who more are without ego. Maybe it's sort of an affinity thing, you know, like.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, like attracts like.
Maybe. I really don't know.
Yeah.
And when I look at what has been recorded the past 7 years, there is some instrumental electronic stuff that you could call meditative, but there's also hard rock or folk music or experimental jazzy weird shit.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it has anything to do. Just what I want to say with this awakening thing.
Sure. I think I know how you're going to answer this next question, but let's see. Susan from New York asks, would you be able to describe your thoughts about what happens to individual consciousness after death? Does the individual continue?
No.
Oh.
There is no individual already, so.
So that's not how I thought you were going to answer it. I thought you were going to say, I don't know. So, okay. So then by that token, you would probably think that reincarnation is not the way things work. Because there's something moving from life to life.
Entity. Yes. Okay. So whether we call it an ego or mind or soul or whatever, it's always talk about a separate entity. There's no such thing. That's the illusion.
Yeah.
Already right now there is no separate being. So there is no separate being jumping from life to life or going to Valhalla or Krishna Loka or whatever. There's no such thing. What will happen, death is nothing else than the dropping away of the me illusion. That's all.
And so either the me illusion can drop while you're still alive, or it can drop when you die, but either way it's going to drop.
Yes. Yes. And it drops every night as well.
Yeah, when you sleep. In
the dreamless sleep state, everybody's perfectly happy. Why? Because everything you love and hate, which you need an eye for, you need an eye to love and hate, well, it all drops away. That's why everybody is really happy when they're asleep. And still some people claim to be afraid of death. That's insane.
Yeah. So what do you make of the evidence for reincarnation? And there is some substantial evidence in which, you know, some kid like starts describing in great detail about the fighter plane he flew on in World War II, and then knows the names of his crew and all kinds of stuff. And then his parents do some research, and they found that there really was such a guy, and he, you know, and he did this and that. I mean, there's a lot of stories like that.
Yes, there's a lot of stories about everything, and a nice way to look at it is it's like recycling. Mm-hmm. So there's one ocean of energy, and somebody dies. Mm-hmm. So the energy contained in this somebody gets free, and let's say the green strand of this energy comes somewhere, and a new organism is created, and a big chunk of this green energy comes into this new guy. Mm-hmm. And then he remembers, and because he believes, like everybody else, that there's a separate entity, he's going to say, I was the fighter pilot. Mm. Like there are 10,000 people who say, I was Napoleon. Right. That's funny. Yeah. And they usually, and there's another thing that I noticed in this energy work that I did in the 90s, we did also reincarnation therapy. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody, including this one, was always a king, a queen, a high priest, or something like that. I heard very little about farmers.
Yeah, the guy who cleaned the toilets.
And there were a lot of more, right, farmers and toilet cleaners. No, we all were magicians and very special people. Oh man, come on.
Yeah. The woman who just asked that question, you might, if you haven't done so, you might want to watch my interview from last week with Sri M, who goes into great detail about all kinds of memories he has of specific past lives, and they weren't all kings and princes. It was, you know,
good.
He was a prostitute, he was a this, you know, all kinds of experiences that he remembers. Yes. Well, that's, I don't know. It's like, it's not a question I want to argue with you, because who knows what's, I mean, I don't have a certainty of how it actually works. I have a sort of a belief, but the belief is not anything final. It's just like a theory. But there's certain, but it's a very different worldview than you have. You know, I have this sort of progressive worldview where there's a sort of a progressive evolution over, you know, vast amounts of time to higher and higher levels of expression, and you just don't see it that way, and that's fine. And I don't know if either of us, in the context of this interview, could convince the other. But
there's no point.
No point.
The only thing I could hand to people who believe in whatever. Reincarnation or afterlife or whatever. If you want to learn something about this, investigate in why do you need such a story.
Well, there might be, there might be.
Just try to look at it.
Sure. There might be needy reasons for needing such a story.
Yeah, and maybe there's no need, but it might be that you confront something in yourself who needs to believe whatever.
Sure.
Instead of just being.
Right. There might be some motivation that's dependency, or, you know, some lack.
Comfort or fear or whatever. And it might be interesting if somebody would like to do that, to see what is the basis of this story or theory that one claims to believe in. Another thing I'd like to say, I know a lot of people that believe or say to believe in reincarnation or afterlife or sitting with God or whatever. The funny thing about this is that most of these people don't live by it. If they would really, truly, totally be convinced that that was the case, they would live another life. It doesn't add up.
They'd live differently than they're living, you mean?
Yes, yes. So I can see that it's only on a verbal level that they sell that story to themselves, that they believe in this and that, but it's not, it didn't touch the ground. It's not complete.
How do you expect a person would behave or live if they, you know, truly believed in reincarnation and were honest and not hypocritical about it? I mean, how
more
are these people,
complete, more in tune,
more in tune?
less egocentrical.
Mm-hmm.
If you really believe that you could go to hell or to heaven,
Yeah.
how do you explain to be greedy, destroying the environment which your Lord made?
Right.
You know, and it says that the meek shall inherit, or you should be generous. You love yourself like love thy neighbor like you love yourself. Well, we've seen in history and even today a lot of discrimination and warmongering from our Christian or Muslim brothers.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So people aren't
that's
walking
insane.
their talk.
It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and if
So
you really
I don't
believe
buy
that
it,
there is
but
reincarnation, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I understand that they like their own sales pitch, but I'm not buying it.
Yeah.
And if you keep repeating that, well, maybe these people get something out of it, obviously, but it's very flimsy stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's say you go to CERN in Geneva and you say to the physicist working there, you know, why do you want to find the Higgs boson? You know, I mean, what's in it for you? What's the point of it? And they would say, well, we want to understand how the universe works. If we can find this thing, it will help us, it'll explain a lot about the way the universe actually functions or was created. So, you know, let's say that we take reincarnation as a working hypothesis, a theory. And it might be of interest to some people, not others, to investigate that theory, and if it can be investigated, to find out, is that true or not? Does that really happen or not? But if we just say, nope, doesn't happen, then we're not really being very scientific. You know, we're just dismissing something without possibly, you know, being open to all the investigation that may already have happened.
Sure. But I cannot deny what I've seen or how I see things. So.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that somebody else has to agree with me. I really don't care. But I have to say, if confronted with these kinds of questions, how I see it.
Yeah, it just jibes with your experience and your understanding.
Yes.
The way you see it.
So if it's clear, and I might say that again, that there is already now no separate being, there is nothing that can incarnate or reincarnate. There's nothing here already. Well,
yeah, the answer to that is if, you know, I mean, you perceive things as a oneness, but at the same time, you have your body, I have my body, your Kasya has, your partner has her body, and so on. There's on a certain level, there's apparent separateness, and so in terms of reincarnation, by the same token, it's understood that just as we have separate physical, biological bodies, we have separate subtle bodies. And those separate subtle bodies can move on to another physical body when this physical body dies. That would be the mechanics of it. Now, ultimately, with a capital U, okay, there's nothing, you know, there's no individuality. But we're not talking about ultimately, we're talking about a relative phenomenon.
Yes, I understand. Mm-hmm. But also on a relative term, I think it's a strange thing because it would suggest that there's some learning would occur.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see it. I'm reading a history book that has been issued last year, Silk Road, so it doesn't really matter, but you get a history of 4,000 or 5,000 years, which is not so long, but still. You always see the basic things. Humans, power hungry, greedy, very little empathy.
Yeah, the same patterns keep repeating themselves.
Well, that's still here, so.
But that doesn't deny the possibility of an individual soul learning and kind of moving.
No, it doesn't. But one of the side theories was that, like I learned it in the 90s, or they all believed in this kind of stuff, that there was learning Every life experience, you're learning more and getting closer to God or whatever. Well, I would say it's not working.
Well, you're saying it's not working for the species, but for individual souls, perhaps there is some evolutionary, direction that takes place and progress is made.
Yeah, yeah.
But then there's new ones coming along which haven't learned the same lessons. So although
but why do they leave?
The general consensus, though, is that in many respects we have learned a lot as a society over the thousands of years. I mean, it's not considered kosher to burn people, to accuse people of being witches and burn them at the stake anymore. And there's all kinds of ways in which we have matured and improved as a society.
Yeah. Okay, if you say so.
Oh, it's true. It's true. They are.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is one of those.
Have you heard that there are more slaves now than in any time?
I have heard that
in history.
No, you're right. You're right.
You know,
it's just not institutionalized, but it's this underground system that's going on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Voila. So we're just more sophisticated, and we now press a button and 500 people die. And we used to go at them with a club, which looks a little messier, but
yeah. But
at least it's face to face. It's honest.
But you and I, Hans and Rick, aren't the guys pushing the button or clubbing people with a club.
No, obviously
maybe
not.
we
And we're just talking.
Maybe we were 100 lifetimes ago, but we've grown out of that tendency.
Mm.
I'm just playing with you.
Feel like it.
This is one of those questions like free will that you can kind of go on, and philosophers have been debating forever. But anyway, it's fun to play with.
So it's all very simple. Just one, two. Will is never free. I want my ice cream. What's free about that? Come on. This is really easy. They should teach this in fourth grade or something. Free and will exclude each other. Is there will? Yes, of course. Look around. But it's not free. I have to be the CEO, otherwise there's nothing free about it. It's all needy and pretty childish.
Well, it's a matter of degree. I mean, some people are more gripped by impulses and obsessions, and others are not so much. But
yeah, but they didn't make that.
They didn't make it.
My last book. It's titled something like "You didn't make you. You are happening." You didn't grow your nose. You're not in control about your thoughts. Nor you nor I can decide now what we will be thinking in 30 seconds.
True.
So I'm happening. I'm not in control.
But like, let's say, remember you were telling us earlier about how you kind of adopted this process of looking at things rather than avoiding them. And in so doing, you worked out a lot of stuff that you hadn't worked out before. So that seems like it was a conscious, intentional process. And something...
No, that's what you make of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying this happened.
It just happened spontaneously.
I didn't do it.
Yeah.
It did me. I didn't do it. It's the other way around. Mm-hmm.
And
so this insight came to me.
Right. You did it.
I didn't decide to not run and hide anymore. It became clear that running and hiding was fruitless and perpetuating my misery. Because I could see that my ego was telling me, if you deflect and avoid and whatever, you'll be safe. And I saw it was a lie. Mm-hmm. I didn't become safe. I stayed afraid. It was a lie. And I didn't decide it was a lie. I saw it.
Yeah.
It happened.
It's not something you had a choice in, just something that happened to you.
Yes, and everything is like that. But we always project this ego fellow that makes decisions and has a free will and whatnot. Well, I always say, if you have a free will, okay, will yourself awaken now. Come on. Mm. Choose to be awakened. Prove it. Nobody can do it. So it's beside the point and irrelevant.
In my understanding, we have a little wiggle room, you know? I mean, there's a certain leeway within which we can sort of guide the boat this way or guide the boat that way, but we can't just make the boat fly or, you know, just suddenly turn an ocean liner a 90-degree angle. There's certain restrictions, but we operate within those boundaries, and there's an intentionality that we can exercise one way or the other to shift the tendencies slowly, like turning an ocean liner.
Mm. Yeah, okay.
Here's another question that came in. Not that I'm avoiding your response to that, because that's another one of those things we could go on all day. Mark Peters from Santa Clara, California asks, can you describe the contrast in your relationship to your own thoughts before and after awakening?
The difference is that I used to take them very seriously and consider them mine. And now it's just, there's a lot of birds flying, you know, we live in the forest,
right.
But I don't pluck out all the birds and say they're mine.
My birds, right.
So, yeah, my birds, my thoughts.
Yeah.
Nothing is mine, or everything is mine. So, and my opinion is not better or worse than the next guys or girls. So thoughts are quite irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And I imagine you would say the same of actions, you know, being a more concrete thing than thoughts, but it used to be my actions. Now it's just sort of a more spontaneous flow. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that you notice on that level is it's very hard to be proud or feel guilty. Because you need a me, a claimer, a one to be responsible for that.
Right.
And again, the illusion of I could have chosen differently. No, you can.
Right.
I shouldn't have done that. Well, yeah, but you did.
Yeah.
Because you are like that, you know. There's nothing wrong with it, but we always create this super ego that should be perfect. And some people imagine that awakening means that you be a 2.0 version, a better me, a better self. But the truth is no self. Yeah. There's no better Hans or something. This is a dream character. It's pretty irrelevant, basically.
Well, that's probably a good note to end on.
Right.
I was thinking of something Ramana Maharshi said about the bodhisattva vow in Buddhism when somebody told him about that, where someone takes the bodhisattva vow, they're going to come back lifetime and after lifetime until all beings are enlightened. And he said, he laughed and he said that's like saying, I'm not going to wake up from this dream until everybody else in the dream wakes up.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Oh, good.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, Hans. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
You're an interesting guy.
Okay.
So let me make a few wrap-up points. I've been speaking with Hans Laurentius in the Netherlands. You go to his website and it's in Dutch, but there's an English section on there too, which you can find, and there's a bunch of articles written in English that you can read. And this interview is one of an ongoing series, so there'll be another one next week. If you'd like to be notified of future ones, you can either subscribe on YouTube or on batgap.com. There's an email subscription thing, or both, if you wish. There's an audio podcast to this. We've been having some technical problems in the last week, and the podcast hasn't been working properly, and people have been emailing me, but we're working on getting that fixed. And a lot of other things, but if you just go to batgap.com and explore the menus, you'll find what's there to be found. So, listening or watching, and thank you again, Hans.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll see you all next week.